So good afternoon, I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live, something we do every Monday at 3 o'clock, even when it's President's Day. So we may be a little light today because people are on half holidays. Panelist profiles for the people that are on is on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post your comments and questions on the Q&A and the chat, and complete the survey at the end. This deck is on mondaylive.org if you want to see any of the links. So our February theme is from smart to autonomous buildings. So we're going to continue that conversation today. This is our agenda. General chit chat for a while, and then we'll get back to the topic. And this week today, we're going to have an open discussion. So once we get into this part of the agenda, if you have something that you want to say and spend a couple of minutes and opine on air, as it were, put up your hand at the right time, and I'll bring you in and give you the stage. And some slides and links that some of us have put up there. Jim Butler is talking about breathing other people's air. I love to hear what that's all about. Mark Peacock is talking about the shortage of chips, which is a big deal for any industry that wants to be smart. John is talking about ESG. So he'll explain that, and Ken is be talking about the change focus that he's been writing about. And I saw a couple of things. One, Spotify is letting employees work from anywhere, literally anywhere. But the kicker is that while still paying San Francisco and New York salaries, that's kind of a interesting sort of development. Now, so this is not directly in our space because mostly to do with 5G, but there's some legislative activity in Washington D.C. about IoT, or internet connected devices. So that'll be interesting to see. So bring everybody back, and so who wants to jump in?
I'll go if nobody else will. Our March issue is the amazing women in our industry, and their theme this year is choose to challenge. And part of that challenge, with challenge comes change, which works out well because that was kind of our sub theme, is be the change. The articles are starting to roll in. I'm extremely pleased with what we've got so far. Still waiting for Teresa's. The other thing I've got posted there is autonomous buildings adapt, respond to human needs and behavior. This is something that I just came across as I was looking through the women's profiles. Found some new women in our industry, which I always do when we do this March issue. So that was good. So what's driving the autonomous building movement? Unprecedented, can't say that word. Access to data, insights, clarity, driving more important outcomes in experience, well-being, and sustainability. So that's good. We had the 9th Collective Community Collaboratory. I was just on an email with Kim from AHR before the meeting started, and she's looking at adding that to the AHR. They're trying to create some interest between Chicago and Las Vegas, to kind of keep the momentum going. Of course, we all would have normally been in Chicago to do that show, but it was done virtually. And my last one is that we need to transition our industry from worms to butterflies. I think that is, that's really what we're talking about, is our industry is really in the cocoon stage. And what we're describing is that we have to come out and we have to get noticed. And maybe that's a metamorphosis we're in.
Great.
That's all I got to say. And it's the crack of dawn behind me.
Thanks. Mark, do you want to chime in? Tell us about how the chip shortage is.
Yeah, I think, key industries have already started to feel the pinch, obviously, as I have in the article, the automotive industry. And in fact, Ford and GM have shut down a couple lines temporarily because lack of semiconductors and chips. And it's obviously started to take note. Also attached article there is with the Biden administration. And within our industry, I'm starting to begin to hear the same. I was on a conversation with some folks end of last week, and they were bringing up the shortage coming, or whatever. And obviously the big industries, the names are out there, such as automotive and a few others, computers, get they start talking about it first. So I'm hoping, if in fact it is, that we won't see too much suffering, especially in that there's a lot of momentum going for our industry right now. And the last thing we need is chip shortage, where various IoT devices, controllers, sensors, just add to the list that there's a supply shortage. So just something to be on the lookout for.
We're already beginning to see it here, Mark, in some projects we're doing. And I always worry about run on the bank phenomena, that maybe there actually isn't that much of a shortage, but because everybody's worried about a shortage, they run out and hoard.
Right.
So there might be some of that effect going on, but we're definitely beginning to see it in some of the products we manufacture.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happens that we supply product to the companies that manufacture the equipment that makes chips, And I can tell you that there definitely is a shortage, and a shortage of capacity. 2020, that business was up about 20%. And we just heard last week that our main ecosystem of customers is expecting it to go up another 30% this year. So they're trying to get additional capacity out and up and running as quickly as possible, but it's going to take a while. So
yeah. So
Tracy, how much of that industry did we offshore over time? I mean, I know we sent huge amounts to Taiwan instead of building capacity here.
We ship, nearly everything we ship is offshore. So a great deal of it, for sure. We ship primarily to subcontractors who build components of the equipment, various compute modules and handling modules and so forth. So, but a lot of it is offshore. Absolutely.
How many, is anyone building new semiconductor fabs in the US right now to meet this demand?
I haven't heard of any new fab construction, but I'd be really surprised if there wasn't something going on. And at a minimum, I think a lot of this is going into retrofit, where they're changing out technologies from 300 to something larger kind of thing, 300 millimeter to larger wafers and things like that. So
I know there's upgrades going on, Tracy, near you. Yeah. No names mentioned. I know we're involved in that. I don't know if it's an expansion or a complete upgrade or whatever, but they are most definitely doing something in Chandler there.
So. Yeah. And that Intel, I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but Intel around us is, they've got a big fab down here in Chandler. And when they built that, they built it with a plan in mind to continue to add and add and add. And that's been an ongoing thing since they opened the first building, actually.
I've also heard that the Taiwan Semiconductor TMC is supposed to be building huge capacity in Arizona. Is that ongoing, Tracy?
I have not heard anything about that yet.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's not happening. I just haven't heard about it.
Did the, back in the day, well before COVID, I think, what's their name? Foxconn was looking at Minneapolis or somewhere in Minnesota.
Yeah, it was Foxconn. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Wisconsin. It was Wisconsin, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm curious, I don't know, are they pursuing their manufacturing operations?
I heard it died. In broken ground 2 years on.
Yeah, I heard it was more of a story and it died. They're not doing it anymore.
Right.
So it's hard to be in this anything industry without
There is a
microprocessors.
story about Taiwan Semiconductor building in Arizona, actually.
Hmm.
They just announced in November.
Right.
Yes. Moving on, John, you want to talk
Yeah.
about ESG?
Yeah, I think this is interesting because throughout the last year we've seen the stories that building owners don't care about energy because the COVID crisis is much more serious. Will it come back, et cetera? And I think my assessment with that article, which I found very positive, that there is more interest in ESG, is that energy is a too narrow way to talk about it. Companies do care about overall sustainability, of which energy and efficiency that most of us directly affect here with our businesses is a part of that. But the bigger story is there seems to be much more emphasis, and all the major companies are getting behind this commitment to ESG, environmental, social, and governance, improvement. And so I thought that's encouraging. I would say on the business side, we're seeing inquiries that are different. Right now, they may be, one of the concerns is they may be slow moving because they're kind of coming in from a different angle, which is further away from deployment of things. But there's this growing kind of groundswell of interest around ESG, of which, the energy efficiency most of us help with are key.
Okay, any other news or things anybody seen that we didn't get to a slide to? No. All right, let us move on then to talk about smart. So maybe we sort of go back to the chip shortage, but not so much of the chip shortage, but just the sort of the general move toward smart stuff. And I would imagine that part of the reason that we're consuming a lot of chips is that lots of things are going smart, right? And we're part of that. Is that a good assumption? And is this going to be, is this a bigger trend that we should be worried about? Does anybody know? Speculate?
Not from the building side. One of the things I noticed, and this is just anecdotal, but there is on the smart home side, the plethora of switches, lights, embedded stuff is just mind-boggling. I went out to buy a couple of lights and switches the other day, and 2 years ago I bought a bunch, and there was a handful, and now the selection is huge, right? I mean, the number of people providing, I bought 3 Wi-Fi enabled, LED lights for your house, for your kitchen for it was less than $15, and you start to, makes obvious sense. We'll hook it up, and they all work with Alexa, and they all work with Google, Home. There just seemed to be this huge uptick on number of devices in the smart space, in the smart home space.
Do you think it's being driven by do-it-yourselfers, or is it being commercially driven for the home?
I think a bit of both, Mark. I see there's a large push by traditional hardware manufacturers who just decide they need to be in the space if they want to be competitive, and adding smarts to their existing lights or switches. Every switch manufacturer now has a smart switch, right? All the Lutrons, the Clipsals, everybody has. You could it's all available. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's the hardware guys getting into the smart space and just putting stuff out there. And then, there's still a lot of DIY.
I think another thing that's happening is the LED light bulb has been such a game changer in cost and reliability. When you go to the hardware store, my local hardware store, they no longer sell an incandescent bulb unless it's a heavy duty. I needed one for one purpose, and I had to buy like a heavy duty, like a light, what do you call it, a trouble light bulb, because you could not buy a standard incandescent bulb. You had to buy an LED bulb. So right away you're faced with buying a new technology, and all of a sudden, well, for another $5, I can have it Wi-Fi enabled. And what will that will do it? Oh, it can change color. And I've had some of my neighbors get into it too. I would never ever think of coming into building automation, but they got fascinated by the fact the light bulb could change color on command. So yeah, and dim and bright and do all those things. And was less than $30.
Well, I still have my clap on, clap off light. So that to me never breaks. It works. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
It would have been hilarious if your lights went out when you did that, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the sad part is, Mark, actually the smart bulbs are now cheaper than putting a clapper.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Actually, if you've not played with the smart bulbs, they're totally amazing. The other thing that hits us on the nose is how easy they are to actually, basically bring into your Hey Google or your Alexa or your whatever, or your phone, even if you don't use those technologies. There's some lessons there we need to learn. How that's all coming together is just phenomenal. I just fascinates. I've got 5 or 6 different bulb types. I'm intrigued to see how each interface works.
So I guess the question for us is, and by the way, people and the attendees, if you want to join us in the chat here, put up your hand, raise your hand, or say something in the chat, and I'll bring you in. Yeah, sort of, in the home, I think you're right. The home is driving the growth, and just wondering if a similar kind of trend is going to happen in the commercial side and when that is, because this IoT stuff is obviously working.
So throw this out to the group. So California and I think it's Oregon passed effective January 1 of this year a IoT cybersecurity type bill to further enhance, almost I don't want to say guarantee, but enhance the cybersecurity of IoT related devices. How do you think that's going to play into the more mass home market? I mean, what are they going to do? Because it seems like a lot of these, to your point, Anno, they're just kicking this stuff out and it's dirt cheap. And whether or not truly does it take into account the cybersecurity or other things that obviously I think our industry takes into account, meaning the commercial building space. So any thoughts, group?
I'll throw out a thought that, what I see is everybody's looking for a simple answer to cybersecurity, right? Like you can check 5 boxes and then it's secure, and they're not, I'm talking the commercial side, not resident, and not including the intricacy of the deployment architecture of how it's deployed into the IT infrastructure, right? They want, the product manufacturer to guarantee that it's secure without any knowledge of how it's going to be installed. We had a recent case of this where somebody was focusing on a password specific attribute, right? But they weren't focusing on how they're going to deploy it in an IT architecture. It's messy, it's complicated. I'm not an expert in this. We got Steve and we got Jim in there, but this searching for, in some ways, expecting a product manufacturer is going to be able to guarantee security without any knowledge of how the network architecture.
Never happens. Yeah.
It can't happen. It can't happen. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, so John, I'm writing an article for the RECC, the Real Estate Cybersecurity Consortium. They'll be published in March. It's basically the state of the industry with respect to cybersecurity in 2021. And to your point, that's really where we are. This is not a couple bullets in the gun and you're done, and it's a very complicated problem. And not to mention the fact that our industry is hasn't really thought about it in any serious way up to this point. So there's a lot of education involved. There's so many facets to it, and it's just where we are, and it's going to take time. But the real objective here is, my mind, is to get all new systems going in to be secured at least on day one. And that means you deal with the network side, you deal with the configuration, you deal with policies,
Yep.
You deal with user management. So, and you secure, the server, all the different aspects that make up a system should be properly addressed on day one, and then ideally get managed from that point forward under some sort of a internal or external service arrangement. But we're not there, I can tell you. I mean, it's very, very few systems that go in that are properly secured at the time that they're installed. And it's going to be a lot of work to get our industry to move in that way, to where it becomes just part of what you do.
Yep.
So do you, Steve,
And-
go ahead, Jim.
No, I was just going to say, Anto, to the point of, what is the difference between the consumer line of products and the commercial stuff? There's a huge problem with security that has to do with scale. And the scale we're talking about in the fields we deal with are so much larger than the consumer space. And in addition to that, the number of stakeholders, in the security space in your home, it's you and maybe the vendor of your communication technology. But in a commercial space,
Right.
there are 5, 6, 7 different parties involved, all with their own rule sets, or all trying to make the rules. So it's a very, very different game between clap on and clap off and what we're doing.
Although I think we have to be careful, because what we've got now is people walking across the floor, coming out of their houses. They have all of this flexibility in their houses. They have all these technologies they can use, and now they come, so they see our buildings like prisons. It's like, everything is locked up. You can't move it. I can't function inside of that. I'm not sure it's another detraction from trying to get people to move back into the building. So somehow we have to make that friendlier.
Good point,
Steve,
Ken.
so Steve, to what you just said, couldn't agree more. How about this? And what our discussion this month is smart to autonomous buildings. So I think everybody on this call and the folks who are attending, I think all understand the importance of cybersecurity with smart buildings. How do you see it changing when we go from smart to autonomous? I think that cyber becomes ever more important than ever before when you go from smart to autonomous. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a must-have, Mark, if you're truly going to be autonomous. So, but I think the number one issue, frankly, we talked about it in different ways over the last few months, is how service is delivered in general in our industry. So we're a construction-based industry. Most of the contractors out there are going from project to project, as we know, and they're not service organizations. Cybersecurity demands round-the-clock service. Just does. Okay. So how do you structure? How do you get an industry to change such that there's money in the budget for service, and that there are companies who are prepared to deliver those services on a regular basis, so it can happen. So, you take elevators, for example. Every commercial elevator has a service agreement with it. because they're maintaining that elevator.
Mhm.
So for them, it's a natural extension to add cyber into what they're doing. They don't necessarily do it today, but you can see how structured as an industry they're able to do that. When you look at security, physical security, particularly intrusion detection and even access control, those industries have a history of delivering managed services. Building automation does not.
Exactly.
So we have a real challenge to actually deliver performance or high, reliable security because putting it in the first time at the end of the project and thinking you're done, no,
And it's
in no way,
especially
shape, or
for
form.
autonomous. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I think to your point, cyber is a key element if we're going to make that shift from true smart, as we define it,
Yeah.
you know, however you want to autonomous. So anyway.
So I've brought Keith into the conversation here. You wanted to chime in about PCI?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me here and being able to make a comment on this. I spent decades dealing with retail clients, and I'm going to be polite. I'm not going to mention the particular client's IT department that I was talking to about this, but we were engaged with them. Their name, it starts with a T. So there's two retail customers that actually got breached, and it was the same issue. So I'm on the phone with their CIO or whatever, and we're talking about security. And to John's Petsy's point, I mean, he nailed it. And also you, Steve, they're ultra hyper focused on the hardening of the hardware, the VPN validation and strength of the VPN.
Mhm.
How did both of those organizations get breached? They forgot about the social aspect of security.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so the number one reason why customers like that get breached is not due to because they didn't have a strong enough encryption or they didn't have a hardened device in there. Some hacker called up one of the techs, and we had 80 technicians, so it was a breach point for us. They called up one of the techs and said, "This is the VP of T, and I need the password right now to get into to check some air conditioning." And the tech said, "Well, I don't know. I got to check." He said, "You better give me the friggin' password right now." And that's how they got the password. And then on their point, if they were complying with PCI, you wouldn't have put the same password. You would have the password isolated from. You wouldn't have that for the same SQL Server storage for your PCI information than from your facility information. So it was on them as well. In fact, I read an article that said the vast majority of the time when they do a postmortem on breaches with retailers is because they failed to adhere by PCI. So it's on both of them. But I mean, I saw that over and over again. So as a CTO, I came out with a mandate. We put all our techs through security. I would test them. I would send them emails coming from the CTO of Phoenix. I would say, "I need this darn password right now."
Yeah, you do phishing campaigns, right, Keith?
Yeah. We would try to penetrate, and it was our policy that anybody, even the CTO or the CEO that gave out sensitive information, they were immediately terminated, no questions asked. So everybody forgets about the social aspect of hacking. I mean, which is the number one breach point. So that's my comment.
That's
People
great.
are always going to be the weak point of any system.
Sure.
Mhm.
Right.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for allowing me to comment on that.
Pleasure.
Very helpful.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. How are you doing? What's your perspective from the FM side of what we're talking about?
Well, it definitely, all of it rings true, right? Interesting you bring that up because I am in talks with someone in our product development team, just talking about the overall arching space of FM within our commercial landscape at JLL. So more to come in the following weeks. Nothing I can share right now. Thank you, though.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going to, Chad's been making a few comments. I was going to pull him in to chat. Where is he? I can't find him. There you go. Hey, Chad, you are now on. So what's your thinking right now about what we're talking about smarts and cybersecurity as being a barrier, and looking at the consumer side as an encouraging sign of adoption?
Well, there's a lot of news going around from the Florida water treatment, so I think that's only a good thing for our industry. It's making it a viable thing to talk about. You know, we have to become uncomfortable so we can actually change. I always say that, you know, it's either fear or incitement, you know, causes changes in people. So I think that coming out is actually a good thing, you know, believe it or not. It really just creates a hopefully a call to action to people to start talking about this more and more. And I'm actually working with Steve. You know, I'm a Totem certified distributor, and you know, looking at cybersecurity from an IoT perspective or an OT perspective, we have to learn the ropes of IT. I commented in the chat there that for some reason, I've been through this myself. You know, if I do not get what I need from the IT admins, for some reason they are considered our enemies. You know, they're retracting our productivity. The thing is we were worried about with, you know, all of the protocols from the serial age, you know, the LawnWorks, the BACnet, the Modbus, all of those. We weren't on a level playing field then. You know, now we are engaging in a different realm of potential opportunities, which allows us to expand via data transmission and stuff like that. So we have to learn the rules, you know, and we have to do the proper things. And we have to look at it a holistic approach. We can't just lock a few things down and not do it. We have to look at authorization, authentication. We have to look at user management. This is a complex thing. And now that, you know, we're actually getting introduced to it, we need to gear up, you know what I mean? It's not just, you know, a simple password manager. We have to look at it holistically. So there's a lot of work to do, but, you know, there are a lot of products out there and there are a lot of resources out there that can help us do that. So looking forward to, you know, securing more systems and getting true, you know, secure remote access invoked, so we don't have to worry about, you know, these social influences that Keith was pointing out. I mean, that's a great one. You know, it's only as good as the processes that back all of this stuff up. So that's my my insight, at least with cybersecurity.
So presumably at some point in time, we're going to get this cybersecurity issue sort of licked, as it were, in terms of managing it. And is that a realistic statement, or and
no? The problem is the hackers are always going to try to be a step ahead of you, right? I mean, that's part of their game. Their business is to keep ahead of the curve. I mean, look how much resources banks put into protecting your accounts, you know, and I think banks do a phenomenal job. You know, Bank of America rings me up when something looks a little bit off. And you know the amount of dollars and resources they apply to that, and I'm sure there's all sorts of tech that tracks, you know, the type and the place, and you know, so, you know, the mission is the hackers' mission. That's all they do. That's their whole life. You know, how do you? We kind of treat it as a, you know, as a bit of an also ran. Like, well, yeah, we're going to go do that as well, and these guys do it as a full-time job to hack.
Yeah,
I think we have to be careful. Sorry, I think we have to be careful that
they have to win once. We have to win all the time.
Yes.
Sorry, Ken.
So go ahead, Ken.
Okay, I think we have to be careful that we don't get into the situation that we think so much we can't stoop to action. I think that's a particular problem here, is that you're going to try and make these things so super secure, but every time you do that, you make them more unfriendly and less like other IT stuff. And ever how they're doing the other IT stuff, we have to learn how to do that. Ever how the banks do it, we have to. I heard another comment that I thought was pretty interesting. Is we are no longer the construction building industry. We are the high tech folks that support the repurposing of buildings. I think that's really the description of this group. So we've come across the floor We are no longer who we were. We are now the people who are bringing to the party the high-tech solution. So we have to look at what IT is doing, and we have to figure out how they're doing it, and we have to put those things in place. We can still have our securities underneath for our particular systems, critical systems, but they can't prevent us. They can't be barriers. I think we've got to be careful how we do that, because the trouble is that's who we're competing with, is the IT companies are going to come in and do it, and you'll be able to tell why you don't like what they're doing. But the issue is if the public accepts that and we start doing it, we got a problem. So we need to understand more this transition.
So Anno, back to your point about, you brought up the banks and the financial institutions, good example. I think part of the difference is they have compliance issues and regulatory issues that force them to do what they do, period.
Yeah.
If not, they're going to get dinged, they're going to get fined, et cetera. If we take our traditional building environment, commercial office, even retail to some degree, whatever, other than possibly the government, there is no mandatory, there is no real compliance issue. It's up to the owners, the operators, the service providers, the contractors, and so forth and so on, as I see it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Mark, is that, their compliance requirements is much more significant, and, they get measured against that and their standards against that, and we don't have that.
But as somebody said earlier, we're starting to see regulations on cybersecurity in California and others, for example. So maybe that's what we're waiting for before it becomes mandatory, and then we all have to behave like banks the way Anna was describing. And then is that kind of the turning point, or is that?
But who's the we? That's part of the
Yeah.
problem, right? We make
Exactly.
a product that goes into a system that goes onto a network with lots of other equipment that comes from different suppliers and men. Who is that we that can do that? I can't do that with just my software application, right? That's going into this complex systems with integration. Who's the we? That's to me.
Yeah, and I would argue ultimately, John, it's the building owner is got to be the one responsible.
I agree.
Yeah, there's no one else to really be that one point of authority in this whole equation.
Yeah.
We all
And
share in it.
I can tell you one of the customers that we're aware of is a significant REIT, and because of the investment they're making in this area, they were able to go to their insurance company and negotiate lower rates on their cyber policies.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So there's an opportunity here, but you really got to look for those forward-thinking building owners
Mhm.
to want to take a leadership position. I think REITs in particular are more of all the classes of customers out there. They have a sort of a fundamental vulnerability because they're leasing space and they don't want to deal with the tenant dissatisfaction. So from their perspective, they don't want to be saying, hey, the building's uncomfortable and it might be a couple of weeks before we get it back up and running again. So they have an incentive. And of course you have hospitals, which don't want to deal with those risks, but not everybody sees the risk in equal terms.
So if
The leadership that we see on the customer side is coming from the U.S. General Services Administration and the Department of Defense. So those are two very big customers, and to my mind, they're leading the way, and they're quite far ahead of the industrial clients that we see at this point.
So if we put together at the end of this month's discussion a must checklist for a building to be autonomous, do we all agree that true cybersecurity is in fact a box that needs to be checked for a building to ever become autonomous, along with whatever else?
As long as it's driven, I can't remember who mentioned, as long as it's driven as a continuous service, right? Because you know, needs to be. It's not a one and done thing.
Right. Okay, but the
Yeah, we
point
need-
is, we've got to have cybersecurity needs to be addressed for a building to be autonomous or make an autonomous model for a building.
I was going to say, I think something similar to what Anno said, but to me, it's more than just checking the box. It has to be the kind of cybersecurity vision, if you will, in there that is continuously learning, progressing, updating, adapting to new threats. So in doing it relatively autonomously, right? Being the whole vision there, something that is continually updating and assessing new threats and adjusting.
Again, I'd like to jump back to the autonomous car because it's struggling with exactly the same thing right now. And the way it's approaching it is they're basically learning as much as they possibly can. And they're at the point that they could release these autonomous cars, but they're still gathering information. And the cars that aren't autonomous are actually doing that. And as I think that model we have to watch and start trialing into our buildings, that some of our sensors start to learn and they start to understand. And hacking is part of learning. Cybersecurity, when there's a breach, how that happened. So that's going to come out of the artificial intelligence model and the autonomous model. So anyway, that's something I think is.
Let me try and ask the question that Mark was asking slightly different way, because is there anything more important than cybersecurity for us to sort out?
In order to get to an autonomous building, is that what you're asking?
Yes, to get to anything near autonomous building, yes.
I think there's a number of quagmires here to sort out. And you know, once you start flipping over into the data side of it, I mean, something as simple as who owns the data and what does that mean? You know, we had a conversation about that a while ago in this group. So I think there are a number of issues that, depending on your point of view of the world and what your role is in it, could be equally important. But it certainly seems to be one of the foundational pieces that has to get solved for this.
I just want to pick up on what Jim was saying about the government regulations, because you've got some in the DoD and you've got standards now on the broader front, the GSA type front. If you think back to how most of us got in this industry in the early 80s, it was the tri-service specification for energy management. If that rings a bell with some of you, it does with me. So that became the basis for the original building automation, or I would call them energy management specifications that went into the private sector. And then, you know, companies like I was with Andover Controls, we took that spec, we modified it, put it into more commercial terminology, and so did Honeywell, so did Johnson. And so, but it started with the government because they became a core purchaser of energy management systems. So there's a lot to be said for if we followed that pattern, again, where the government drives a standard for cybersecurity that the then commercial space can pick up and build on.
Well, you got people like NIST and what's that group in North Carolina? An association, I can't think of the name right now, but you've got those groups in addition to what you just said, Steve. You know, I think trying to lead the way, but whoever said this, ultimately, it is a shared responsibility, in my opinion, between the building owner, the technology provider, the contractor, integrator. But at the end of the day is whoever said, where does it really fall? The building owner? Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm just saying the spec is a major component. And if the government comes out with some, it will influence a lot of what gets done. Jim, do you agree with that?
I do, Steve. And, you know, we see that happening. And to Mark's point, I think that NIST is completely involved with it. ASHRAE is involved from the standpoint of our industry. So I do think that is going to be the pull that gets us really started in this dialogue.
Okay.
From the vendor side, we've gotten together a group which is pushing a technology called Managed BACnet, and I'd be happy to talk more with you about that at a future time. But at least most of the vendors of building automation have gotten together to at least be a counterpart, so the government, others can have that conversation.
That's great. So, all right. So on the road to autonomous, what else is in our way? There's a question here.
I'll speak to it a little bit, and I find that, and you guys have brought this up many times, it's all about educating the building owners and actually making them aware of what we know, which is vast. You know what I mean? I'm learning so many things, about cybersecurity more recently, and it's educating them on what they should be doing and invoking a process of actually managing all of this stuff all at once. Like, we can't prioritize cybersecurity over everything, you know what I mean? So we need to maybe educate them to say, you guys should be thinking about this and developing these processes internally into your buildings, organizations, your portfolios, and then you get service providers to invoke those practices to bring those technologies and professional services to adequately sustain and either rejuvenate, revitalize, or just make your building operational. I just think it is an education thing right now. You know what I mean? We just really don't talk about it with customers yet. And I think if we start doing that, it will change the game, and it will make them more aware, and they will start thinking about it, and they will start demanding it. They don't want to be compromised. What's the cost of not having cybersecurity? Well, think about everything that you've done or that your contractors have done that will not be replaced if you don't have backups. I mean, people don't even, provide contingency plans for their buildings. You know what I mean? It's a problem, you know what I mean? And we really have to start educating, I believe, the building owners so they actually start demanding this from us.
So Chad, is it as a provider of who you are,
Mm-hmm.
when you are engaging with opportunities, do you proactively bring it up and have that conversation?
Absolutely. I'm a technology consultant. I mean,
Yeah,
my owners, my building owners, my customers, they need my insight and research. I mean, I've talked to pretty much everybody on this panel and on this chat. You know what I mean? I am out there trying to diligently find out what the best what the best tools are to invoke into the customer so they can create their solutions with the right processes and then with the right people. The technology is just a tool. You know what I mean? You have to have the people, and the people are the most important thing, but they're also the most flawed. People make mistakes. Technology, they have bugs, but they typically do repetitive processes that are consistent and repeatable. So yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to educate people about, the different standards. And that's another thing we can learn from the IT groups. They have standards. We unfortunately don't, you know what I mean? We don't have standard practices of programming. Maybe we have something to look up to with ASHRAE 36. We don't have a potential standard yet for tagging, and we never will. You know what I mean? It's always going to be a competition, it looks like. But we can learn a lot from, IT. I don't want us to be scared of it. Let's embrace it and learn.
So, and a quick question. So Chad, just fueled this. For an autonomous building, should there be, or must there be specific standards, whether it's cyber, whether it's whatever? Is that something that is a mandatory thing for a building to become autonomous?
I think that, standards have always followed, right? In that market drives and then standards come. Typically, we always tend to be a bit of a wild west here, and we do things and then people come along and go, well, that's great for the early adopters, but won't work for me to jump the gap, right? And that's really where standards needs to become part of that for it to work for the masses. I think in the autonomous world, we are still in the early adopter phase of the curve, right? In that we're still Wild West and people will try things, and then, you know, as to get over the gap, and then standards has to be part of that equation.
So Rick just asked an interesting question on the chat about learning, because in the case of the autonomous cars, the cars are learning, as I think you pointed out, Ken, as they're driving along, even the ones that are not autonomous. So his question is, how are building systems going to learn? What is because learning with sort of machine learning and AI type of thing, the quantity matters. You need lots of data points to learn. So this touches on smart learning or.
Okay, well, I think that, again, we follow that industry because they've got so many millions of dollars that have been thrown at it. And the video is something that we're really lacking in the building industry. We have not used video analytics like everybody else has. And we're starting to see it now coming simply for controlling occupants and controlling the spacing of occupants. One of the stories that was early in the learning was Tesla, when they first introduced their cars to Australia. All of a sudden a kangaroo would jump out in front of the car, and the car had no idea what to do with that, because I'm 1,000 miles from nowhere, and all of a sudden a pedestrian jumped in front of me, and it just was very confused. And they actually had to write a workaround for that, because what it did is it hammered on the brakes, and you know, there was a bunch of ramifications in their auto driving, and that's where they were actually using it, zipping through the outback, and everything was going fine until, you know, these kinds of situations. So it has to learn, then we have to make the mistake and then correct the mistake. We don't really have that analytics kind of going on in our buildings right now, and that analytics would probably not be done well by anybody on this screen. So again, this learning that Chad's talking about, we're all struggling. We're just, it's the Wild West, and we're all trying to learn what's going on here. We are the experts in the industry, but we have so much to learn to do our jobs.
And learning en masse, when you're talking about large number of data points, require collaboration widely, surely, so that the learnings can be put into products or technologies.
Yeah,
I mean, the other thing that learning has in other industries, what's happened to learning is it is not a thing that people do. It's a thing that machines do. It's basically artificial learning. And I have no knowledge of anyone in our industry that has kind of entered into that realm as of yet.
So Ken, in terms of learning about potential cyber risks, there's sort of two, I think, primary areas that that are of concern. One is looking at all the user traffic, just looking at traffic, knowing where it's going to and from, and being able to compare that to a known steady state or benchmark. So you're looking for anomalies, you're looking for things that haven't been showing up. There are tools out there that do that today, and will identify. The other area is you've got a authorized user, call it that, okay, and you're looking at changes to the operation of the system that don't make any sense. So somebody alters a set point, turns on equipment when it shouldn't be, disables alarms that shouldn't be disabled. So you're looking for that kind of changes to the way the system is designed to operate that, again, fall outside, and that machine learning could address that one as well. I don't know of anybody doing that as an example of an area that needs work.
And of course, that is being done in like our credit cards every day. They basically shut down your credit card if it's being used in two cities simultaneously. That doesn't make sense to them, so they shut it down and then basically try and find out what's going on. So, you know, those basically putting analytics into that next level where there's kind of an AI algorithm, or at least a learning algorithm that is starting to look at it. We haven't done much of that. I think that's an area we need to explore.
it's starting to happen. We've seen it. We've done a little ourselves, watching for those patterns in data. So, you know, the other thing that this reminded me of listening to you guys talk a long time ago, when I first kind of got into the food service industry in terms of automation and so forth, had an interesting conversation with a food safety person at one of the national brands. And we had developed a temp monitoring and alerting system that they could put into their freezers and refrigerators to warn them if, you know, temperature got too high and the food was at risk. And they paid NRE upfront on this. We, you know, as we developed this, we developed it for them. And when the project was done, we were having a conversation and kind of, you know, hat in hand, hoping that we could take some of the stuff that we did with them and maybe start selling it to some of the other brands. So we asked that question, and the response was the interesting part when he said, listen, you are absolutely free to take this and sell it to as many other brands as you can. In fact, I'll help introduce you to my counterparts where I know them in other brands, because food safety is an industry issue, not a competitive advantage. And I think that some of the stuff when it comes to cybersecurity in buildings needs to be thought of that way, as opposed to a competitive advantage. My product's better than yours, it's more secure than yours, so on and so forth. And that's always been a little bit of a challenge, I think, in our industry. I don't think we have quite that level of collaboration going on. But the truth of the matter is, if one building gets breached through a control system, no matter whose name is on the box, it's going to hurt all of us and cause problems that will ripple through the industry. Every time it does, it happens. I think, Steve, you were just, or somebody was just talking about the calls they got after the recent breach. I think it was in Florida.
Yeah, Bill Bain was, yeah.
Yeah, Bill was, that's right.
Yeah.
So Jim, that's a huge point from Tracy. You're involved in this cybersecurity sort of collaboration. Do you sense that kind of behavior likely to happen in our industry?
Not yet. I think that what we see right now is a race to get security products out into the market. But I like Tracy's point of view, and I hope it evolves in that direction. I think that the biggest problem we have is not the race between the vendors right now. As Steve and everyone else pointed out on the call, we've got just a tremendous education problem with the owners and with the ecosystem overall. The channels, the owners, everyone's learning, everyone's feeling their way. So hopefully we'll reach an end state that is more along the lines of Tracy's point of view. We're not there yet.
That is a great vision, a great destination. So we're at the top of the hour. Anybody have a closing remark they want to share?
I think Keith wanted to.
Go ahead, Keith.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Real quick. So again, and I completely agree with Tracy's comment about the food spoilage, loss, safety, all that stuff. It's a primary concern. But again, just like the security, there's another side to it that's probably pretty minor. So statistically, maybe 80-90% of all food loss is based on ice cream melting, so to speak, and spoilage. But there's another 10 to 20% where you actually destroy the product by over freezing it. I talked to my son, Keith Jr., he was actually a manager at a store, and I went to him and I walked his store one day. And he told me that he gives out more free ice cream based on the ice crystals forming it and in it and ruining the quality. So as far as food loss, he actually had more loss of product based on it being over frozen. So again, it's always a holistic view and understanding what it is from close down.
It is. It's always two sides to that. We alerts for consuming too much energy is a problem in refrigeration too, and that's one of the alarms that I've seen used, where you're overcooling, so you're wasting energy, right? It's an energy point.
Yeah, and destroying product. I mean, but how much people only emphasize what they get in trouble for most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna make darn sure that we over freeze this stuff to make sure it doesn't spoil. Oh, we destroyed it because we're over freezing it. You know, you destroyed your product. So
Okay, that's a great place to wrap this up. Thank you for a great conversation today. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Chad, for joining us. We will put up the video of this by tomorrow morning, and we will see you next week. We are going to have a guest that's going to talk about digital twins next week. So hopefully you can all come back. All right. Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Later. Bye.